So what we're going to talk about is storytelling with Data Studio, and um, hopefully many of you are use Data Studio somewhat, or are interested in learning more about Data Studio. There's going to be a mix of technical, sort of a little bit of how to do things specifically in Data Studio, as well as kind of ideas behind getting to like finding stories and revealing stories in data, and communicating them in Data Studio. Along the way, I am going to show how I did some of the things that I'm showing you in Data Studio, but not everything. And I think it's fairly inevitable that some of you will say, gee, I'd really like to know how you did that. Um, and at the end of the hour, I have additional time to just go through specific questions, dig into things specifically. I see somebody commented that you've never heard of Data Studio. Well, the that is going to be a lot of the focus. So I guess if you've never heard of Data Studio, it is a free Google product for um, building dashboards to present data. And as a dashboard, it does so by connecting to the actual data source, so you can create interactive interfaces, so that your audience can filter data, change date ranges. So really a platform for building interfaces to present and interact with data. So myself, I've had this slide up here for a little while, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But I've been doing web analytics for a long time, and I guess my background. I studied math at university. I always had a penchant for design, and ended up getting into web development. Um, and really a central theme around everything that I've done is teaching people how to understand data, and ways to work with data, and ways to use data to make better decisions. And it really, I think, this topic today is super near and dear to my heart. I mean, I think well, I just I guess I personally love finding the meaning behind things, and the being able to communicate that to an audience is a really important and valuable skill. If you're curious about the amateur bell founder, I do in my spare time do bronze casting of bells. So it's another thing that I love. And if you want to stick around in office hours and talk about that, I'm happy with that too. Um, so um, one thing I guess I'll point out here for those of you that are familiar with Data Studio is I'm going to do this presentation in a Data Studio dashboard. So I might show you later a simple little trick that you can in PowerPoint or Google Slides. You can export a given slide as a graphic file. I prefer a PNG just because it handles. JPEGs are good for images with a lot of variation. PNGs work better for images that have solid fields of color, which typically slides do. So I'll export it as a PNG, and then I just import it as onto a tab in Data Studio. So this is Data Studio. Another thing that I'm using here that you may or may not be familiar with is this these drop-down menus in Data Studio, and that's something that Google released, I think, kind of around last November, something like that, as a form of navigation in Data Studio dashboards. And I think that combination of being able to pull in just a graphic on a tab and being able to use drop-down navigation actually makes Data Studio itself an incredibly powerful presentation tool, and that obviously ties to today's topic of storytelling with Data Studio. So why are we here? Well, if you've never heard of Data Studio and the subject of being able to tell stories with data is not of interest to you, then you know, you might want to do something else with the next hour or next 45 minutes. So we the this graphic comes from Gaping Void. Which is now a consultancy. Once upon a time, it was a guy that drew really intriguing pictures on the backs of business cards, and I love this visual. I love the story that this tells of like data is this kind of just undifferentiated mass of words and numbers, or letters and numbers, and showing this progression through to impact. The the this construct has actually existed for a long time in information science, like this idea of a hierarchy from data to wisdom, and there's the let's see, so the, there's a thing called the DIKW pyramid, and this is what I'm going to use as the kind of organizing principle around what I'm going to talk about. And this is really similar if you look at it to this gaping void drawing of data, information, knowledge, insight, wisdom, and then impact. Here we've got data, information, knowledge, wisdom. There's not insight in here, and I liked that idea of insight, especially for those of us who what we do is share, try to share insights through the data that we present, and that is really, I think, presumably many of you are involved in digital marketing, and in digital marketing we collect a lot of data and we use that data to help us make better decisions, and understanding insights from that data, whether that's how the user experience on a website, or how a given campaign is performing, or audience characteristics, like that customers with these or prospects with these characteristics are more likely to become customers than those. Like it is something that we do every day, is to try to understand, find in data insights that we can use to improve performance and make better decisions. Certainly what I'm going to talk about is relevant to that topic area, even if you're not involved in digital marketing, but digital marketing is what I do and is going to be kind of the central focus of what we talk about here. So like an interesting related topic, this DIKW pyramid is something that exists, and there's a handout that you can get in Demio, the platform that I'm doing this in, that includes a link out to the Wikipedia page for the DIKW pyramid. Really interesting if you're in the like if this topic area is really central to what you do, of how do I take data and make it meaningful. There's some interesting ideas in there. Something I loved about it is on the Wikipedia page, it actually says that the origin of the DIKW pyramid, many people think, comes from a T.S. Eliot poem, which I love. So, and I mean, in the poem, where's the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? Where's the knowledge we've lost in information? And it really speaks to our age, that we are overwhelmed with data and information, and have we, are we have we lost the ability to find knowledge and in particular wisdom? I am not going to spend a lot of time talking about wisdom because I think that's above my pay grade, honestly. I think in a dashboard, I think we can convey insights. To me, wisdom is something that's earned through experience and not something that I can teach you how to convey. So I came up with a modification of the DIKW pyramid, and I have called it the DIKI pyramid with insight at the top instead. Morgan, who sort of bought me a little bit of time before I joined, we were talking about it and looking at this model back here, and she really liked this sort of this build, like this idea that um, what I mean, a lot of the process that we're going through is a narrowing, is a fine, is actually sort of taking this huge body of data, and you could, like, a way of looking at it is that we're reducing as we go. So we're getting rid of things that don't matter at all to get to information. We're sort of we're providing more meaning and context to get to knowledge, and then we're highlighting specific things to get to insight. And so this view of it, I think, is really useful. So let's start with talking about information and presenting information, and what is the difference between data and information. So I took a sample, and this is coming. So this is organic search data. Um, this comes from Google Search Console. And if you're not familiar, Google Search Console is another free tool that provides data about how your website is doing in Google organic search. So it gives shows what pages are getting impressions and clicks. And there are other things that Search Console does, but the thing that we're going to be focusing on, that the example that I'm going to walk through, really goes into the sort of this aspect of Data Studio data. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, it really, I think the data I chose is not that important really to the topic today, but if you have an interest in the looking at organic search data, I do think you'll find it very interesting. And again, if you have the time, stick around and we can talk about aspects of that in more detail, or just reach out to me. My contact information is in the presentation, which is available for download, and I'll share it at the end as well. So data, I mean, that doesn't take a lot of explanation. It's just words and numbers on a page. And really the distinction that I would make between data and information is that data becomes information when a person can understand what it means. So one of as I said before, like, one of the things that we're trying to do is get rid of what we don't need, and an important step towards getting rid of what we don't need is, what is the focus of what we're presenting? And I say graph or table here. I mean, I think you could more broadly say, if you're building a dashboard or presenting data, what is the primary focus of what you're trying to do? What I chose, again, and this is as an example, is to understand our website's topical authority in Google search. And so when I say our website, I am a principal at 2Octobers. We are a digital agency, and I mean the 2octobers.com website. And what I want to understand when I say topical authority, well, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is just not just like what are the keywords that we're showing up for, but topically, how does Google see our website topically, and therefore arguably our business? So that where do we have authority overall? And this has become a really important subject in the world of SEO, which is that, like, Google has evolved well beyond just looking at individual keywords and trying to understand authority in a topic domain, and what is the sort of universe of topics of interest related to a central topic. And so this idea is really helpful in terms of, if we think about sort of where do we have strength, and that's something that we can build on to get more visitors to our website, and hopefully share um, our message with people, get customers, get employees, so have more impact. So but also obviously where you don't do well is useful. So that's what we're focusing on. Um, so uh, uh, as I mentioned before, a first step is really just simple, like get rid of what you don't need, and uh, just think of, I mean, really just basics in visual presentation. So a really common, um, uh, I don't know, flaw I see in Data Studio dashboards is that it's fairly easy to connect to a data source. And when you do that, you're going to pull in the names of columns of data from the data source. And if we look at my example here, that's what we're doing. And they're all lowercase. They also, it's using the default theme of this dashboard. And so it's actually gray, which doesn't provide a lot of contrast with the green background in the header bar. Some of them maybe are a little less clear. In this case, it's not terrible, but I do often see dashboards where you're pulling in data from different data sources. And like, for example, Facebook data has a lot of terms in it that it's like how conversions are described in Facebook data is really confusing. And to your audience, what they care about is, did I get a lead? And there's like 400 different ways that Facebook data like describes a lead, like that the actual column headers are these long and confusing things, and people will just leave that in the table. So one of the first things that you want to do is go and rename all your column headers and be consistent about that. The So I've done that here. Also added a little bit of formatting on rows just to make it easier to understand. The next thing is start to like the goal, you want to create understanding. So what is the person looking at? Like, and this is another thing that I often see in dashboards is don't just like people don't actually describe what the table represents, or chart. So describe that, try to describe that clearly. And another thing that's kind of curious about Data Studio dashboards is they all have, like when you create a dashboard, it'll have a default date range, but it doesn't say it anywhere. And one way to, I guess you can kill two birds with one stone is just by always including a date picker, so that the viewer understands the date range, but also has the ability to make changes to that. So here the distinction is really subtle, but if you recall, what I'm really focused on as I go through this process is reduction, is getting rid of what we don't care about. And the question that we had was, how does Google view the topic authority of our website? And you'll see the very first query that shows up here is 2 Octobers, which is the name of our business. And we call that in the SEO, in SEO and search marketing in general, we call those that branded search. Like that's somebody is not actually looking for the services we provide. They know who we are. They're looking for us. That's really a different category. That would sort of fall under what some people call navigational search. And it doesn't really have to do, I mean, yes, we have topical authority for our own brand, but we don't really care about that for the purposes of this exercise. What we're interested in is what are the general topic areas where we have opportunity to grow content, or gaps where we think we should be have authority and we don't. So what I did here is I actually just filtered out 2 Octobers from that data, and I'm let's see, going to click here to show you just quickly what did I do here, and and please chime in chat, and if there are things that you're curious about as we go, and let me know, and if I feel like it makes sense to cover it right now, I will, or we'll cover it later on. So if we look here, so we have 2 Octobers on this tab. Now we go to this one, and you see down here, I've just added a filter, super simple, exclude branded. And in the filter, I say exclude branded, and you have the ability to say, if a row matches this, then exclude it. You can also do include filters, but that's really when you're presenting data, always be thinking about what can you filter out, what's unnecessary in terms of what it is that you're trying to communicate. And that process is, as I just demonstrated, very straightforward to execute on. So I'm getting pretty close to what I would call information. I've labeled it clearly, and it's pretty easy to digest. One thing I would also comment on is that leaving white space in dashboards, white space is what gives what you're presenting power. And I sometimes I think it's fairly common for more technical people to feel like, well, I've got some white space over here, I need to fill it with something. Like if there's not like that's an opportunity to add more stuff, and that's a terrible instinct. Really, what is it that you're trying to convey? Think of white space as the source of power for what you want to draw attention to. If you're curious, so as presenting it this way, I can just from a sort of technical standpoint, all I have to do is as I'm presenting the dashboard, I'm hitting my right arrow to go from tab to tab. So just in terms of when you're thinking about the idea of should I create a presentation in Data Studio, the actual execution of it is really straightforward. All right, so now what we want to do is, okay, we've arrived at information, and how do we get to knowledge from information? And the way how I would describe that difference is that with information, the information, I understand what it means. That's the contrast with just data, that it starts to have like what are these numbers actually represent? What do these words actually represent? Pretty low bar. When it comes to knowledge, what we're really trying to get to is what are the relationships between information, and that could be a relationship to time. It often is in what we do. That's the most important relationship that we want to understand, is how does a metric change over time. And other examples would be to competitors or to a goal, or across different categories, which is something that we're going to focus on here quite a bit. So so let me drill into that a little bit more. So this idea of classification and categorization, I think, like when you're sort of maybe as you think about the idea of storytelling, that isn't necessarily inherently like you wouldn't have necessarily thought of classification as being an important part of storytelling. But when it comes to storytelling with data, it absolutely is. Like if we, just to sort of imagine the idea of like a story, a uh, I don't know, a favorite children's story or something like that. Well, the idea of archetype is very familiar, and the idea of sort of this versus that is very familiar. And because we start with raw data, like we have to arrive at some sort of this versus that, like that we have to create some understanding, and again, sort of grouping, I think I mean, it is a very fundamental part of human nature is we understand things better in groups, and this is, this can certainly be a destructive trait in terms of it's where stereotypes and racism come from. Um, okay, that's oversimplifying, but this idea of I've created a categorization or a group in my head, and now I can ascribe attributes to that group. There's a downside for sure, but it is human nature. And so when we're trying to convey information from data, um, this this is central. And I mean, some types of data will naturally come grouped. So you might have geographic data that has as an attribute the state or country, and that's a useful group. In this case, what I did is I actually created groups, because the idea is that what I wanted to understand is or the topical authority. And so again, I want to show you a really fascinating and powerful capability of Data Studio here, which is the data did not come with this grouping, but when you're working with data in Data Studio, if you go to a data source, you can add your own columns to that data source. And what I did here, and this is going to look pretty beastly, I do actually have a video that walks through exactly how to do this on YouTube, and it's fairly short. But I created this topic column that looks at individual keywords and matches words in the query, and then assigns it to a group. So we won't go into the exact how-to, but up here the example would be that if it has the word storytelling or data story or data narrative, then put it in the data storytelling group. And then I've got a bunch of other topic categories. Incredibly powerful, and you're going to see what that has allowed me to do here. So all right, so I've added that as a column, this topic. That's the main difference that we're looking at here. Right now that's interesting, but it's still pretty overwhelming. So let's go next over. Oh, one thing, let's see. Oh yeah, so here what I've done is I actually gave myself a little topic filter now. So because I want to understand topical authority, so now what I can do, so one of the things I'm proudest about 2Octobers is we developed a digital marketing apprenticeship program that makes digital marketing a viable career path for anybody. We have training built in, and we have hired digital apprentices that come straight into an apprenticeship without college education, without a background, and well, that's enough said about that. But let's have a look. So if I want to dig into that topic now, I can filter for it. So I just added a drop-down filter on that topic column. And so now I can see what are the types of queries that people are using: digital marketing apprenticeship, and I start to get a better feeling about sort of how am I appearing in Google search. And you can see here, it tells me what is my average position, and what is my click-through rate. One thing I didn't mention in the information when I was talking about information, but I meant to, is it can be useful to provide a glossary of terms. Like I'm sitting here like, of course everybody knows what CTR is, because because it's been sort of a core part of my life for a long time, but probably there's a number of you who don't know what CTR means, and it means click-through rate. And what that means is that when somebody, in this context, if somebody sees a listing on Google, did they click on it? And if they see it, that's an impression. If they click on it, that's a click, and clicks divided by impressions is the click-through rate. So you can see down here that digital marketing apprenticeship in this time period got 1 impression and 1 click, so the click-through rate's 100%. So now I'm giving the person the ability to start to understand, like not just see what the topics are, but actually interact with the data. And I think that's an important aspect of storytelling with data in general is that you really should think about stories as participatory, where you can, I mean, certainly there's going to be cases where you're standing in front of a group of people and you're presenting information, as I am doing right now. But like, I'm not going to sort of open this up and have you give you the ability to click on this and filter this real time in this conversation. But the the idea of the dashboard itself is, the power of it is that you can do that. And so as you see things, you can dig deeper. So you could sort of think of it as a kind of the choose your own adventure style of story, that you're drawing attention to things, you're providing somebody, your audience, with context, but you're also giving them the ability to explore. That's something that you can do in Data Studio, and I think it's, I mean, that's what makes Data Studio powerful with, I mean, as compared, for example, to just taking charts from Google Analytics and cutting and pasting them into a slide presentation. So we will, let's see. Seems to be stuck on that slide. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to do is, all right, a little bit, like, we're focusing on tabular data right now, and I'm going to get into visuals because I think that's where a lot of the story starts to happen. But one thing that I can do here, which is really valuable, is to add heat mapping to any column. And again, I want to show you a little trick here. So if you just go in Data Studio and you insert a heat mapped table, which is a style of table, and if we look, so if we click on this table here, and we go here, and it shows this table with heat map. It will actually heat map everything. A really useful thing to know is that in a table, in fact, and I would never advise doing that. Like a table where every column is a heat map is the opposite of what we're trying to do. Like, what we're trying to do is that pyramid. Like, we're trying to get towards, what do we want people to focus on and understand about this data. And if you put a heat map on every column, what am I supposed to focus on? It's just too much. So something really interesting that you can do is, any table in Data Studio, you can take a column, if you go to the Style tab, and you can change it from a number to a heat map. And so I never use the heat map table type. I just go and say, okay, this particular column is the one that I want to draw attention to. And so here now we're starting to see the data start to come alive a little bit. It's like you see a really interesting pattern in here of, like, these, so click-through rate means if somebody saw the listing, did they click on it? And we see incredible variation here. Now, some of these don't have a whole lot of data. I could increase my date range a little bit, but the 24 impressions and 7 clicks, 30% of the time that somebody saw this listing, they clicked on it. That's pretty astonishing compared to up here, 1.7% of the time. So very, like, as you're getting from just information, the person understands what it means, knowledge, starting to appreciate sort of trends and patterns in the data. Very, very useful thing to do. So, okay. So now getting to visuals. What I've done here is I'm charting out by topic the performance across topics over time. So now we're getting a look at what are the trends. Now one of the things that when I did the classification, and you saw sort of how I did it, I looked for words in queries, and then I put them into categories. what wasn't obvious at first was there's an other category, and we see that other category is kind of dominating the picture. So there's a few things about this that I don't like. First of all, as we've talked about, like this is information that I'm not interested in conveying right now. It might be useful because it tells me that there's a whole bunch of uncategorized queries that I want to put into topics, but to my audience, that's not useful information. So what I want to do, I've done a few things here. So if we look at these two, I got rid of other, and I did it the same way that I demonstrated before by just adding a filter and saying, if the topic is other, then exclude it. I also changed the date range because when we're looking at a time trend, right now this is 30 days, and that's, again, like, think about the time range that you want to present data in, and when, sort of how it's useful and actionable. And I would say that 30 days is not enough to really start to appreciate trends. So what I did is I increased it a bit. So I got rid of other. And then the other thing is I changed the granularity of the date from daily to weekly. And the way that I did that is any date field, you can go in and you can change the granularity. So instead of showing it by day, I showed it by the week. So now you start to get a better feeling for what those the trends in that data are. So I guess, just sort of stepping back from this specific data, the idea is that we're going after patterns. We're trying to show trends. So we're organizing data into classifications. Maybe those already exist in the data that you've got. I find oftentimes I want to add a layer of classification that doesn't exist in the data that I'm working with, and you can do that by adding that field. The then I Dates are a common form of comparison. I One thing I didn't mention at the start, but there is a handout that has notes for everything that I'm talking about. I preferred to keep the I don't really like bullet points on slides. There's obviously already a lot of information here, so the things that I'm talking about are in those notes. So if you're furiously taking notes, just be aware that those already exist. Um, the uh, a few other points to make here. Something that I think is a very helpful principle construct to think about is that color is actually a dimension when you're presenting data visually. So like in this chart, we have an x-axis and a y-axis, and for the most part, people can understand visualizations that are presented sort of two-dimensionally that way. And in the world of data science, there exist chart types that show data three-dimensionally. There are even ways of visualizing the data that go beyond 3 dimensions, but they get really hard for an ordinary person to understand. Like, you really have to learn how to interpret a chart like that. But adding color is easy. So that's something that we can easily pick up on color as an additional dimension. So here, as a dimension, what it's saying is we can see an overall trend of impressions over time, but with the addition of color, now we can look at it by a specific topic. And so when you're working with charts, always think about, can you introduce color to highlight another dimension? One of a number of chart types in Data Studio have a breakdown dimension, which often you can add color to the breakdown dimension if it doesn't already include it. I mean, if it doesn't do it automatically. So the other thing that is really valuable to do, again, if we're getting at sort of how to tell a story, is to describe what the person is looking at. I mean, I've talked about it here a little bit, but to the audience looking at it, I mean, I think we've all had this experience where you go and you're looking and you're like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Where does this data come from? What does it mean? What should I be looking at? What are, what is the focus? Be explicit about that. So here I'm saying we've grouped the queries into topics and other attributes of the data. I this is another thing that I often see missing, is going to help your audience a lot in terms of understanding the data. Now, if you're talking, like if you're actually presenting real time, you could argue you don't need this. Very rarely, in my opinion, does that happen where you're not also putting a dashboard in the hands of other people where they're going to try to use it, make sense of it when you're not there. So we've worked our way through to knowledge providing context, that context. A couple of things that I didn't talk about. If we, for this type of data, I'm really focused on classifying and trends over time. A couple of tactics for providing context. Having reference lines or gauges, I think are really useful. So when I say reference line, many chart types support that I can add a reference line. And so in this case, for impressions, what I could do is say, well, the average topic has a certain number of impressions, and does this exceed or is this less than the average? So let's see, I'm going to get rid of that reference line because I don't want it. Another thing that I should highlight before we go is this drop-down filter works on the chart, of course, too. So now if I wanted to be able to look at a specific topic, I can do that. So insight. So the way I would put insight is focusing on what's most important for sure, but also getting at the whys. So yes, your audience is going to have specific goals in mind. Maybe it's increasing revenue, maybe it's increasing traffic, and so there's a question of, well, how do we do that? And as people analyzing data, presenting data, where we add the most value is to understand the whys, right? Like we may also be in a position of doing something about it, but when it comes to data interpretation, if we can explain why a certain metric is going up and down, that's the first step towards understanding how to move it in the direction that we want. And so this idea of getting at the why is what we're trying to do as we get into insights. So if you recall, the topic that we're exploring here was the sort of how does Google view the topic authority of our site, and we classified things into topics. We used that trend line to show sort of trends over time. That's interesting, but now I'm getting into a visualization that starts to really draw attention to the classes that matter most, or the classifications, the topic categories that matter most. And I guess that's one of the lessons that I would highlight here, is that there are types of visualizations that are good at understanding relationships over time. And for example, the stacked area chart is one that I like to use a lot. But there are also chart types that are much better at getting at sort of drawing attention to what matters most. So in this case, we've got that pesky other category again. I'm going to go ahead and hop to the next view where I got rid of other. So now you can, I guess there's a few things going on here. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but from a visualization standpoint, thinking about heat maps can be a really good way at drawing attention to metrics that, things that are performing best or worst. Bubble maps, I think, are one of the underused chart types in Data Studio, especially once you get into data classification. Bubble maps are terrible if you have thousands of rows of data that you want to visualize. Scatter might be useful for that, but kind of serves a somewhat different purpose. But this idea of organizing things into a smaller number of classifications. So let me explain what we're doing, what we're looking at here, and there's a brief explanation at the bottom. But the x-axis is the number of unique queries, so the number of different keywords that our website is ranking for. The size of the bubble is the number of impressions, and then on the y-axis, the left axis, is the average position. Again, just thinking about meaning, a few of the things that I did, of course, I got rid of other because we're not focused on other right now. I changed the orientation of the y-axis to from actually descending, where 0 is at the top. And the reason I did that is because if you think about average position, the lower the better. And people tend to look at, like, we tend to think of charts as up and to the right is good, and down and to the right is bad. So having average position go that way. So again, just being really deliberate, like looking at a chart, just, I don't want to say lowest common denominator, but I don't know, the sort of classic adage in designing user experiences, um, don't make people think. So try to simplify things as much as you possibly can. So another thing that I did here, again, towards that idea of interactivity, is I switched from that drop down, which would only allow a person to select one, to this fixed lists, which is really just a different visualization of the same thing, but it gives me the ability to pick more than one. You actually can technically pick more than one in the drop down list, but nobody knows that they can do that. That you can, I think it's a command click, you can click more than one. Maybe it's a shift click, you can click more than one. But in this case, the visualization, it's very obvious that I can unselect and select items in the list. So if what I was interested in is I want to say, we'll say data storytelling and data studio, and I want to just compare those two, then I can quickly do that. Let's see. So I've got a couple of things I want to get to quickly, and I'm sorry for starting late, and I will finish on time, but please do stick around if you have questions. I mean, I will tell you as I go that, like, just this process was really instructive and interesting. Like thinking through it, there's a little bit of a sort of cobbler shoes that like I haven't actually gone through our own data this way, and in so doing, we did actually, creating this presentation, arrived at some insights that are extremely useful. A couple other tactics I wanted to show you that are really, I think, valuable in Data Studio. Here, what I'm doing is I'm actually pulling in updates from a Google Sheet. So like if you worked much with Data Studio, it is fairly infuriating that if you put a text box in, then if you want to provide insights next month, you have to delete your text box and add a new text box, and there's no history of information. The formatting options are incredibly limited when you add text box to a dashboard. So this is the tactic that I like to do, which is to provide insights or updates or tasks in a format where it's pulling in from a Google Sheet, which, let's see, I'll just bring it over here. So this is the sheet. I'm just connecting to this as a data source. So I can do my updates here. And then what's really nice about that is that if I have insights that are specific to a time period, then you can change the date range, and then you can see, okay, well, here are the insights from last month. Here's some insights from this month. Here it's been organized by month. We could actually add a drop down if we wanted to pick by month, which might be a valuable thing to add to this slide. Here, what I've done is I've actually taken these insights and I've overlaid them. So this is actually a separate chart where I'm highlighting on this chart. And if we view this, now what I can do is I can actually highlight when this particular thing, like when it happened, which can be really interesting to tie to, well, this thing trended this way in this time period, and here are the reasons why. So again, getting at the why. So the very last thing that I wanted to show you about this is embedding video. Again, if we're talking about storytelling with data, this is a tactic that I love, which is like take literally, like for me, I can in 10 minutes, I can walk through a dashboard and record a video. And you're sitting here like it's 11 o'clock, Nico, or whatever time it is for you. It's the end of the time. You don't seem to be concise about anything. But you can quickly walk through a dashboard and highlight for your audience things that are valuable, record them in a video, embed the video. And one of the things that I like to do is, this is how to use this dashboard. Like, here's how you can like, this is what's interactive, this is what you can do on this screen and this screen. So try that out if you haven't. And let's see, well, that's it. Here's my contact info. I hope some of you can stay on and we can explore some things together. Here's some contact information for me. And please reach out if there's anything you're curious about, anything I can help with. And I really, again, I so appreciate your being here and hope you found some of this useful. If you've never heard of Data Studio, maybe this was a bit intense, but at least you saw some of what's possible. And last but not least, we do have a couple of workshops coming up. Go to 2octobers.com, upcoming training, and to register. And you can also subscribe from there if you want to be notified of upcoming other upcoming workshops as they get added, which I think we'll be adding some soon. So thank you again.